I still remember the day like it happened just this morning. The cold air of early spring in Chicago brushed against our living room windows as I sat on the couch, holding my baby girl Ava in my arms. She was only 7 months old then, a tiny bundle of joy and noise and sleepless nights. I rocked her gently, trying to hush her to sleep, my eyes burning from exhaustion but my heart full of love. Mark, my husband, stood across the room, arms crossed, watching me. There was something different in his eyes that day, something hard, almost distant. I had just finished telling him about a job listing I'd seen online. It was remote, flexible hours in digital marketing, a field I had worked in before pregnancy. I thought it was perfect. I thought maybe, just maybe, it could be my way back. But then he said it. No one's going to hire a mom, Julie. Especially not one who's been out for over a year. Let it go. My heart didn't just crack, it sank. His words didn't feel like advice. They felt like a closed door. I looked down at Ava, her little chest rising and falling softly as she drifted into sleep, and I swallowed the lump in my throat. I didn't reply. I couldn't. Something inside me was too broken to speak. I had given up everything for this family, my career, my independence, my dreams. And now I was being told that I was no longer worth hiring. Not even worth trying. That night, I lay awake next to him, my back to his, tears slipping quietly into my pillow. I didn't hate him. I wished I could. It would have been easier. But instead, I hated myself, for believing that I had to become small to be loved. For putting my dreams on pause like they didn't matter anymore. For letting one sentence from the man I trusted most in the world crush something so precious inside me. That night wasn't the first time I felt this way, but it was the first time I really heard it, that I wasn't just a mom now. I was invisible. Forgettable. Useless even. The days that followed were a blur of diapers, dishes, and doubts. Mark went to work as usual, and I stayed in our small 2-bedroom apartment, drowning in baby giggles and dirty laundry. Every time Ava smiled at me, I felt both happiness and heartbreak. I loved her more than anything, but I also missed the version of myself who used to get up, dress for success, present marketing strategies in conference rooms, and laugh with coworkers over coffee breaks. I missed feeling capable. I missed being seen. But what truly shook me was not Mark's words. It was the realization that a part of me was starting to believe them. I remember calling my best friend, Emily, who had moved to Seattle. She was the only one I could still talk to without pretending. I told her everything, Mark's words, my fear, the way I felt like I was disappearing from my own life. And she didn't sugarcoat anything. She just said, "Julie, maybe it's time you stop asking for permission to be who you are. He doesn't get to define your worth." That hit me harder than anything else. It stayed with me. For days, I walked around with that sentence echoing in my head. He doesn't get to define your worth. So one morning, while Ava napped, I opened my old laptop. It was dusty, slow, and filled with old files from the life I used to have. I opened up LinkedIn. My profile photo was 3 years old. My summary was outdated. My inbox was full of unopened messages. But as I stared at that screen, something stirred inside me. A tiny flicker of the old me. A whisper saying, "Try. Just try." I started small. I took a free online course in digital advertising. Then another. I studied during nap time, during midnight feeds, while washing bottles with one hand and holding my phone in the other. I didn't tell Mark. I couldn't. Not yet. I wasn't ready to share that fire with someone who had poured water on it once. This part of me needed protection. I told myself it was just for me, to feel alive again. To remember who I was. Weeks passed, then months. And slowly, the woman I used to be began peeking through. My confidence, though still shaky, started to return. I began freelancing under a fake name, afraid that Mark might find out. It felt like having a secret affair, with my own ambition. But this time I didn't feel guilty. I felt awake. Then one afternoon something happened that changed everything. I received an email from a well-known startup based in Austin. They had read one of my blog posts on brand storytelling and wanted to know if I'd be open to consulting with them. It felt surreal. My hands trembled as I read the message over and over again. They saw me. A real company. A real opportunity. And they didn't care that I was a mom. They cared about my ideas. I wish I could say I ran to Mark and told him the news. But I didn't. I didn't trust him with this part of my joy anymore. And maybe that was the saddest part of it all. That night he asked me why I was smiling at my phone. I shrugged and said, "Just reading something funny." He nodded and went back to watching the news. And I just sat there, heart racing, soul on fire, feeling like I was walking a tightrope between the life he thought I should live and the one I was secretly building. But I knew something he didn't. Something that would one day leave him speechless. And that something was only just beginning. Every morning after that email from the Austin startup felt different, like my life had suddenly gotten a second wind, one that I had silently wished for during so many long sleepless nights. I kept checking my inbox to make sure the message was still there, like it might disappear if I looked away for too long. I replied that same night, my fingers trembling as I typed each word. I told them I'd love to talk, that I was excited, and that I was available anytime that worked for them. I didn't mention Ava. I didn't mention that I worked in silence during naps or that I took meetings with a baby monitor beside me. I was afraid they'd see me differently if they knew I was a mom. It felt like I was walking on a fragile bridge, grateful to move forward but scared of falling at every step. They scheduled a Zoom call for Wednesday afternoon. Mark had gone back to the office full-time by then, and Ava usually napped around 2. I cleaned the tiny corner of our bedroom where I planned to sit for the video call. I pinned up a white sheet behind me to hide the clutter. I even curled my hair, something I hadn't done since my baby shower. I put on makeup while Ava babbled in her crib. It wasn't just a meeting. It was a small crack in the dark walls around me, and through it, a bit of light was peeking in. When the call began, I felt my voice shake as I said hello. But as we started talking, something in me settled. The woman they were meeting wasn't just a mom. She was someone who had built marketing campaigns that had brought in real numbers, who knew how to tell stories that made people listen. The man on the other end, his name was Alex, smiled after I gave a quick pitch idea and said, "We need someone who thinks exactly like this." I almost cried right there. I had forgotten what it felt like to be heard, not just listened to out of politeness but truly heard. They offered me a short-term contract by the end of the week. It wasn't a huge check and it wasn't permanent. But to me it felt like being handed a key to a door I thought had been locked forever. I accepted immediately and promised to deliver my first strategy draft within 5 days. I hung up the call and walked straight to Ava's crib. She was fast asleep, her tiny fingers curled into fists. I sat beside her, held her little hand and cried, not because I was sad, but because I finally felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Oh, still I didn't tell Mark. Every part of me wanted to share the news, to scream it from the rooftop of our apartment building in Logan Square. But I remembered the way he'd looked at me that day in the living room. I remembered his voice when he said, "No one's going to hire a mom." His disbelief in me wasn't just something I had heard. It was something I had carried, quietly, like a bruise on my heart. So I kept the work to myself. I worked while Ava slept. I worked while she played with her toys. I worked while dinner simmered on the stove. I worked until my back ached and my eyes burned, but I didn't stop. Because every time I hit send on a draft, every time Alex replied with words like, "Brilliant," or, "Exactly what we needed," I felt a part of me coming back to life. Mark started noticing changes. I dressed better, smiled more, even laughed again. One night he asked, "What's going on with you lately?" And I just shrugged and said, "Just trying to take better care of myself." He nodded, distracted, and went back to watching the game on TV. He didn't press. Maybe he thought I was just adjusting to motherhood finally. Maybe he thought I had just learned to accept this life. But I hadn't. I was quietly building another one. Emily knew, of course. She was the only person who saw everything. We FaceTimed late at night when Ava was asleep and I would tell her how the project was going. "I'm proud of you," she said once, tears in her eyes. "You're doing this with one hand holding a baby and the other typing success into your future." Her words stayed with me. My contract with the startup got extended. Then again. And then one day, Alex asked if I would consider coming on as a part-time strategist. Fully remote. With flexible hours. My chest tightened when I read that email. It felt like I had climbed a mountain with bare hands, and now someone was offering me a warm place at the top. I told him yes. 100 times yes. I opened a new bank account in my name. Quietly, carefully. I had to. I didn't want questions I wasn't ready to answer. With each paycheck I saved. With each day I grew stronger. But all the while, a voice whispered in the back of my mind, "How long can you keep this hidden? What happens when he finds out?" And that question haunted me, especially the night I got an invitation. An email from a business magazine I'd followed for years. They were curating a list of rising women in business under 30. They had read my blog, seen the campaigns I had helped craft, heard about me through a connection at the startup. And they wanted to interview me. I froze. It felt like a dream, but it was real. I stared at the screen, hands trembling, heart racing. I had kept everything quiet for so long. But now the world was about to hear my name. And Mark? He didn't have a clue what was coming. It was a Friday when the email came through, an invitation to be featured in the Forbes 30 under 30 list. My hands shook so violently when I opened it that I thought I might drop my phone. I read the subject line over and over again, just to make sure I wasn't imagining it. I could hardly breathe. I wasn't even sure what to think. My mind raced. I was still that mom who, a year ago, had struggled to get out of bed without feeling overwhelmed by the weight of motherhood and self-doubt. Now, someone wanted to recognize me? It felt like I was living in someone else's world, someone else's story. I sat in the kitchen, the baby monitor humming softly on the counter, Ava napping in the next room. The apartment was quiet, save for the soft tapping of my fingers on the screen. I couldn't believe this was happening. My heart was a mix of excitement, fear, and disbelief. I knew that being chosen for such a list could change everything. But there was also the part of me that was afraid of what Mark would think. Afraid of what it would mean for us. I wasn't sure I was ready to share this part of me with him yet. I didn't tell him that night. I didn't want to make a decision in the heat of the moment. Instead, I spent hours pacing around the apartment, replaying every conversation Mark and I had ever had. I remembered when he told me, "No one's going to hire a mom." I remembered the way he'd looked at me like I was fragile, like I was already defeated. How could I show him this now? How could I tell him that the dream I once thought was over had come back and it wasn't just a dream anymore, it was reality? The next morning, Mark was sitting at the kitchen table, drinking his coffee and reading the newspaper like it was just another Saturday. Ava was playing on the floor, her laughter echoing in the room, and for a second, everything felt normal. But my heart was heavy, tangled up in the mess of excitement and fear. I kept glancing at him, wondering how I was going to explain this. Finally, I couldn't keep it in anymore. I put my phone down and said, "Mark, I need to talk to you." He looked up from his paper, his brow furrowing as if he could already tell something was off. "What's going on?" he asked, setting the cup down. I took a deep breath. "I got an email yesterday. Forbes wants to feature me on their 30 under 30 list for business." "There." I said it. I watched his face for any sign of reaction, but he didn't say anything. Just stared at me. It was as if my words didn't quite register. It felt like time slowed down in that moment, the air thick and heavy between us. "Wait," he said slowly, his eyes narrowing. "Forbes? You're serious?" I nodded, my throat tightening. He pushed his chair back from the table, standing up. "I don't get it. How is this even possible? You've barely worked for a year. You've been home with Ava. How can they be offering you something like that?" His voice wasn't cruel, but it was tinged with something that felt like doubt. Maybe it was disbelief. Maybe it was concern. But to me, it felt like the same words he'd said before, as if he couldn't see the woman I had become in the process of building a future for myself. I thought back to the first conversation we'd had about work, when he told me no one would hire me. And now, I was sitting in front of him, on the verge of a major breakthrough, and I felt like I was invisible all over again. "I've been working on this for months, Mark," I said quietly, the weight of it all suddenly feeling too heavy. "I've been freelancing. I've been building something for myself. And this is the result of all that work." He didn't respond right away. He just walked over to the window, staring out at the busy street below. His back was to me, and I could feel the space between us growing wider, like there was an invisible chasm I couldn't cross. "I just don't get it," he muttered. "You've been home with Ava all this time. How did you even find the time to do this?" I opened my mouth to answer, but the words wouldn't come. How could I explain the secret hours I spent working while she napped, the late nights when I stayed up after everyone was asleep, typing away in the dark, the fear that kept me up at night wondering if I was doing the right thing? How could I make him understand that it wasn't just about money or career, it was about proving to myself that I was more than just a mom? That I was still capable, still worthy of something bigger than the label I had been given. "I didn't want you to think I was doing this to prove something to you," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I wanted to do this for me. For Ava. For all of us. This is something that I built." I didn't expect him to understand right away. In fact, I wasn't sure he ever would. He stood there for a long time, not looking at me, just staring out the window, his hands gripping the edge of the sill like he was holding on to something I couldn't see. Finally, he turned to face me. His expression was unreadable. "I don't know if I can be okay with this," he said, his voice soft. "You've been so focused on being Ava's mom that I guess I didn't even realize you were building a life for yourself too." It was like a punch to the gut. All this time, I had been telling myself that I wasn't just a mom, I was me. But hearing him say it like that made me feel like I had been living in two different worlds, trying to balance the person I had been with the person I was now. And I wasn't sure if anyone, even Mark, would ever truly see both sides of me. "Maybe we need to talk about this more later," I said, trying to swallow the knot in my throat. But right now I just wanted you to know. I'm proud of what I've accomplished. He nodded, but the distance between us hadn't closed. I walked away, leaving him standing there, not sure if I had said too much or not enough. My heart was torn in a million different directions. What happens now? How could I keep moving forward when the person I loved most in the world couldn't see me for who I truly was? And yet, the offer was still there. Forbes. It was real. And something inside me knew that no matter what, I couldn't turn back. It's strange how life can change so suddenly, how one moment you can be stuck in the darkness of uncertainty, and the next, the world opens up to you in a way you never expected. That morning, I sat on the edge of the bed, my phone in my hand, still staring at the email from Forbes. My heart was racing. I had already shared it with Mark, but I hadn't heard from him since. It had been almost a week, and yet, it felt like we were still standing on opposite sides of an emotional canyon, unable to cross to each other's world. I could feel the distance growing even when we were in the same room. I was becoming someone I wasn't sure he understood. Ava was playing in the corner, her laughter echoing in the background. But even her joy couldn't ease the tightness in my chest. I had told Mark about the Forbes email, and I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. But I had hoped he would come around, that he would realize how important this was for me. I was doing this for me, not just for Ava, not just for the family, but for the woman I was beginning to rediscover inside myself. I had always dreamed of building something on my own, something that was mine. But the reality of it was more overwhelming than I had ever imagined. I couldn't stop thinking about that conversation we had had just a few days before, when Mark had said that he didn't think I could do it, that no one would hire a mom. Those words kept ringing in my head, even as I was looking at the proof that everything I had worked for was real. But the doubt didn't go away. It wasn't just his doubt that was troubling me, it was my own. I questioned myself constantly. Was this success something I deserved? Could I handle it? Was I ready for what was about to come? The day I received the email from Forbes wasn't just a professional milestone, it felt like a personal one too. After years of feeling like I was just a mom, just a wife, just a shadow of who I had once been, here was proof that I was still capable of achieving something. Something that wasn't defined by anyone else's expectations. But with that realization also came fear. What would this mean for my family? For my marriage? I finally decided to talk to him again. Mark had always been the kind of man who would bottle up his feelings, and I could feel the frustration and confusion he was carrying. I needed to know where we stood, if this was something he could support or if it was something that was going to tear us apart. Mark, we need to talk, I said, standing in front of him one evening after Ava had gone to bed. He glanced up from his laptop, his face a mixture of exhaustion and apprehension. About what? I took a deep breath. About Forbes. About me. About everything. He sighed heavily, pushing his chair back as if preparing for a battle. Look, I don't understand why this is such a big deal. I'm happy for you, sure, but I don't see why it has to be all-consuming. Why can't you just be happy with what we have? With our life? I felt my heart sink. It was like he couldn't see what I was seeing. All he saw was the life we had built, and to him that was enough. But for me, it wasn't about what we had, it was about what I was becoming. I'm not trying to take anything away from you, Mark, I said softly, trying to hold back tears. But I need to do this. I need to prove that I can do more than just be a mom. I need to feel like I'm contributing to something bigger than the walls of this apartment, bigger than just our little family. There was silence for a moment. Mark's gaze softened, but his lips pressed into a tight line. He didn't understand, and I didn't know how to explain it in a way that he would. To him, I was just a stay-at-home mom, and that was enough. But it wasn't enough for me. I had always been so much more than that. I don't know if I can just sit back and let you go down this path, Mark said, his voice strained. What about Ava? What about our life? We've worked so hard to get here, and now you want to change everything? I felt like I had been punched in the gut. This wasn't the conversation I had imagined. I had hoped for understanding, for support, but all I was getting was resistance. It felt like he was pushing me away, like he didn't believe in me the way I needed him to. I can still be a good mom and chase my dreams, I said, my voice trembling. But I need you to believe in me, Mark. I need you to see that I'm not just doing this for me but for us. For the life we're building. This is part of that. Mark looked at me, but I couldn't read the expression on his face. Was he angry? Disappointed? Confused? I didn't know. I'm scared too, I whispered, the weight of everything crashing down on me. I'm scared of what's going to happen if I do this. I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose what we have. But I can't ignore this anymore. There was another long pause, and then he said something that I wasn't expecting. I just don't want you to regret it, he said quietly. What if you lose yourself in this? What if it changes everything? I swallowed hard, trying to hold myself together. I'm already changing, Mark. And I'm doing it with or without your support. But I would rather have you with me. The tension between us was palpable, but I knew something had shifted in that moment. He wasn't ready to fully understand, but at least he was listening now. And maybe that was all I needed, someone to listen. Someone to give me the space to be who I was meant to be. The next day, after Ava had gone to bed, I sat down at my desk, the Forbes email still open on my laptop. I had decided I would do it. I would go through with it. But there was something nagging at me, a voice in the back of my mind telling me that this wasn't just about business or recognition. It was about the person I had become, and the person I was still becoming. And I didn't know if I was ready for what would happen next. Mark wasn't the only one I needed to convince. I had to convince myself that I was worthy of this success. And that was the hardest part. I never thought the day would come when I'd be sitting in front of my computer, staring at my phone, questioning everything I had worked so hard for. But here I was, the email from Forbes still open on my screen, my fingers trembling as I read the words over and over. Congratulations, you've made it to Forbes 30 under 30. The words didn't seem real. It was everything I had dreamed of, everything I had fought for, and yet, in this moment, I felt no sense of triumph. All I felt was an overwhelming sense of guilt and fear. It had been a few weeks since that conversation with Mark, and things had been tense between us. He hadn't exactly come around to the idea of me chasing my dreams. If anything, he seemed more distant than ever. It hurt more than I had ever imagined. Mark had always been the person I turned to when things got tough, but now I felt like I was carrying this weight all on my own. The stress of building something new, of proving myself, was starting to take its toll on me. And then there was the constant nagging voice in my head asking if I was doing the right thing. Was I abandoning my family for the sake of my own selfish desires? Was this success worth the price I might have to pay? I thought back to that night when Mark had first told me that no one would hire a mom. His words cut deeper than I had realized at the time. They haunted me every day. I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe he was right. Maybe I was just a mom, stuck in a life I had created for myself, and maybe nothing I did outside of that role would matter. But then, Forbes came into the picture. I had worked so hard for this moment, and now it felt like everything I had been fighting for was slipping through my fingers. Mark wasn't the only one who seemed unsure. My friends too had questioned whether this was the right time. Ava's so young, one of them had said. Do you really want to miss out on her childhood? It wasn't that I didn't care about my daughter. I loved her more than anything in the world, but I had to ask myself, did being a mom mean I couldn't also be something else? Something more? I couldn't let my entire identity be tied to just one role, just one part of who I was. But at what cost? I picked up my phone again, scrolling through the notifications that had flooded in since the announcement. There were messages from family members, colleagues, and even strangers congratulating me. Everyone was celebrating the fact that I had made it to one of the biggest lists in the world. But no one really understood the weight of that success. No one understood how much it had cost me to get here. And no one understood how lonely it felt, sitting in my living room, holding this incredible achievement in my hands, while my marriage seemed to be falling apart around me. I had to talk to Mark. I knew I couldn't keep avoiding the conversation. But every time I tried to bring it up, the words caught in my throat. What if he couldn't support me? What if the gap between us had grown too wide to fix? I was afraid that I was losing him, and no success, no recognition could fill that emptiness. Later that evening, after Ava had gone to bed, Mark and I sat down on the couch. The tension in the air was palpable. It felt like everything I said was being scrutinized, like every word I spoke was being weighed and judged. I knew he was frustrated, but I didn't know how to make him understand. How could I explain that this wasn't just about ambition or career success? It was about me finding myself again. Mark, we need to talk, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't how I had imagined the conversation going. I thought I'd be stronger, more confident, but right now I felt small and unsure. He turned to me, his face unreadable. About what? The Forbes thing again? I nodded. Yeah. But it's not just about that. It's about everything, Mark. About us. About what's happening between us. He sighed, rubbing his temples. I don't know what you want me to say, Kelly. You've made it clear that this is important to you, but I feel like I'm losing you. And I don't know how to stop it. My heart ached hearing him say that. I had never wanted him to feel like that. But I also knew that I couldn't stop now. Not after everything I had worked for, everything I had sacrificed. I'm not trying to pull away from you, Mark, I said softly, my voice breaking. I need you to understand that this is who I am now. This is part of who I'm becoming. I can't just be the person you married. I have to be me too. He looked at me, his expression softening slightly, but there was still a distance in his eyes. I get it. I do. But I'm scared. I don't know how to deal with this version of you. You're changing, Kelly. And I don't know if I can keep up. I felt tears well up in my eyes. I don't want you to keep up, Mark. I just want you to be with me. I want us to figure this out together. The silence that followed was heavy. For a moment I thought he might say something else, but instead he stood up and walked to the window. I could see the conflict in his body, the way his shoulders slumped as if the weight of everything was too much for him to carry. I'm not saying I don't support you, he said quietly, still facing the window. But I need you to understand that I'm scared. Scared of losing you. Scared of losing what we have. I stood up, walking over to him slowly. My hand reached out, resting gently on his arm. I'm scared too, Mark. But I can't live in fear anymore. I need to know that we can figure this out. I need to know that we can still be a team. He turned around slowly, looking at me, his eyes filled with uncertainty. I don't know how to fix this, Kelly. I just don't know. I felt my chest tighten as I tried to find the right words. We don't need to fix everything right now. We just need to keep talking. We need to figure this out together. The weight of the moment pressed down on me. I wasn't sure where we were going or if we would make it through this. But I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't go back to being the person I was before. I couldn't give up on my dreams, and I couldn't give up on us. The path ahead was uncertain, but I was determined to take it, no matter how difficult it was. As I sat back down, my phone buzzed again. It was another congratulatory message, but this time, it felt like the words on the screen were mocking me. Was this success really worth everything I was losing? The question lingered, unanswered, as the night stretched on. The days that followed were some of the hardest I've ever faced. Mark and I tried to work through our issues, but there were moments when I wasn't sure if we were getting anywhere. The weight of my success seemed to be pulling us apart rather than bringing us closer. I would wake up to the excitement of seeing my name in the headlines, and yet, by the end of the day, I felt emptier than ever. For a while it seemed like nothing was changing. Mark would go to work and I would stay home with Ava, but the house felt like a cold, silent place. Every conversation felt like we were tiptoeing around the same painful truth. We were drifting, but neither of us knew how to stop it. The tension was suffocating. There were days I felt like I was living two separate lives. One where I was a proud woman, achieving the dreams I had worked so hard for, and another where I was just a mother and wife, trying to hold everything together while feeling like I was losing the people I loved. One evening, as I was sitting in the living room, reading through some of the emails from Forbes and other people congratulating me, I heard footsteps behind me. I didn't turn around at first, not wanting to break the silence. But then Mark sat down next to me. For the first time in weeks, he didn't seem angry or distant. There was a quiet understanding in his eyes, something I hadn't seen in so long. I've been thinking, he said softly. About everything. I closed my laptop, turning to face him. What about? I was wrong, Kelly, he said, his voice breaking. About everything. I never should have said those things. I never should have made you feel like you couldn't be both, a mom and someone with dreams. You're amazing, and I should have supported you more. I felt a lump form in my throat. Mark, I didn't want to hurt you. I needed to grow. I needed to prove to myself that I could be more than just a wife and a mom. But I didn't want to lose you. I never wanted that. He took my hand, squeezing it tightly. I know. And I've realized that I was scared. I was scared of losing you, scared of everything changing. But I see now that you don't have to choose. We can make it work. We can have both. Tears welled up in my eyes as I looked at him, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. It wasn't perfect yet, but this moment felt like a turning point. We didn't have all the answers, but we were finally on the same page. The dream I had worked for, the success I had craved, it wasn't worth it if I had to sacrifice the love I had for Mark and Ava. I'm sorry, I whispered, my voice shaking. I've been so focused on this dream that I didn't see what was right in front of me. We'll figure it out together, Mark said, pulling me into a hug. In that moment, I realized something crucial. Success, no matter how big or small, doesn't mean anything if you don't have the people you love by your side. Forbes 30 Under 30 was an incredible achievement, but what really mattered was my family and the love we shared. I didn't have to choose between my dreams and my loved ones. I just needed to find balance, and I knew we'd get there together. The future still held its unknowns, but now I felt a renewed sense of hope. No matter what the next chapter of my life looked like, I knew I wasn't walking it alone.